on roads that are reopening after the flooding coming up a little later. I'd like to get to my guest right now, though. He is David Rose. He is a professor of economics at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Sir, how are you?
I am well.
Thank you. So is it Dr. Rose?
Technically, yeah, but Dave's fine.
All right, Dave. Thank you so much for giving us some time today. What is your take on tomorrow? The city of St. Louis has announced that a judge has given them permission to go ahead and increase their minimum wage to $10 an hour from $7.70, and I'm guessing a year from now it goes up another dollar to $11 an hour.
That's correct. My take on that, huh?
Sure.
I think that this is basically good politics, but bad policy. And the reason why is that in the short run, many firms that employ low-skilled workers will have no choice but to continue employing them and just putting up with the higher wage bills. So in the short run, not much happens other than some people get paid more, and so that's very politically tempting because it looks like all gain and no pain. But the costs tend to mount later. So we have high political benefits early and high economic costs that come late. Let me give you just three quick ones right off the top of my head. Over time, when firms' machinery and capital wears out, they have to replace it. Those firms that are in the high minimum wage area will replace it with more expensive capital that will displace more workers as they try to conserve on labor.
Right.
Another thing that can happen is that firms, after a few years, as soon as they get a chance, they'll move to another location with lower minimum wage. But the third thing is the hardest thing to perceive and probably the most important thing of all, and that is firms that would have otherwise come into existence but don't. So this is like the dog that didn't bark kind of evidence. So you have a situation where there'll be areas of the city that somebody might have started a little restaurant or a little hardware store or a little shop or maybe opened a McDonald's or something, but it just doesn't even happen. So we don't see the cost, but the cost is real because we have fewer jobs for teenagers in that area.
You know, it looks like they've set some parameters for this, so it's not going to affect companies that employ less than 15 people or have a gross of less than $500,000 a year. They have to be over that $500,000 a year gross number. And for a lot of people, that seems like a big number. But, you know, for a small business, that's about $40,000 a month, roughly, that they're bringing in. And that's going to, I think it's going to hit a bigger percentage of businesses than they believe.
I think that's true. The other thing it's going to do, this often happens with people who want to engage in centralized planning of economic activity. You tell them, hey, there's this inefficiency problem, and they really can't deny it. The supply and demand graphs are so clear about where the problem is. But then they say, well, if that's a problem, we'll solve it this way. Yeah. Well, the problem is each solution creates a whole new problem. I would imagine that we're going to have a bunch of firms that currently have 17 people who are going to be down to 14 people. This is exactly what happened under Obamacare. A whole bunch of firms started changing the number of people they employed, full-time versus part-time, and total in order to get under these thresholds. If those levels of employment were what was best for those firms and best for society initially, then that means moving to a different level is now something that is not as productive for those firms. So that's a loss to those firms, and it's a loss to society of lost output in those areas and lost job availability, again, mostly for poor teenagers who really depend on those kinds of jobs.
You know, we had this discussion with a caller a few minutes ago who called in about minimum wage and really what it's designed for. I mean, I know early in my career, I was saying I worked at an amusement park. It was seasonal, so they could even pay me less than minimum wage. So I made like $2.30 an hour. I never intended to make a career out of that. And ultimately, I've always perceived minimum wage as sort of a starting point, but a false wage floor based, like you said, maybe that's what it gets down to for a lot of companies that might have come into existence or somebody wanted to start a company. They look at those labor costs and realize it's just too much.
That's right. It's very tempting for economists to talk about the minimum wage at the margin and just say, well, if you increase it, these bad things will happen. and then they can sound like a good free market economist without causing too much trouble. The truth of the matter is the optimal minimum wage is zero. There just shouldn't be a minimum wage. The minimum wage produces very little effect on most people. The only people who are affected are those who are very low-skilled. They tend to be teenagers who don't have any job experience and haven't even graduated high school. These kids don't have much ability to create value for firms, so they don't command a very high wage. The problem with these kids is that they need skill. If you get them employed, even at a very low wage, then they start to learn good work habits and so on and so forth. And if they go to school and learn the things you learn in school, and maybe go to college, then that drives your value up. I think the minimum wage is a very shabby, superficial solution to a real and deep problem, which is why are there so many people whose skill level is so low that they can't command a higher market wage?
That's
the real problem, and this is just a way of politically addressing the issue, getting some brownie points for being nice, and in reality making the problem worse.
Well put. Dr. David Rose from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, professor of economics. Thanks for your insight on this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Have a good day. There you got it. I couldn't agree with him more. Little did I know I had a PhD in economics, but he completely agrees with me.
You're brilliant.
I'm just teasing. I'm just saying. He kind of backed up some of what I said earlier, so I appreciated that. We had that worked out in advance, by the way. I'm just teasing. First time I've ever talked to Dr. Rose. Let me get to a couple of phone calls here before the top of the hour. Kathy, you're on the radio.
Good afternoon. I had a few points to make as far as the city and the earnings tax. My daughter lives in the city, and she pays the earnings tax even though she works in the county. Now, one of the problems that I see already is that if the city comes into the county as a municipality, does all that debt come with them? Because you're going to have workers who are making $10 an hour in the city, and suddenly it's a part of the county. Do they get their wages cut? How does that work? And also, I am a small business owner. I agree with the doctor said just now, 100%. But I make less now after 30 years of being a small business owner than I made back then. And my solution to that is I had never given myself a raise, but my solution to that, and I wish everybody had my work ethic, is to get more customers to make more money.
Right.
But when you have Obamacare, and Obamacare just doesn't affect. It's all the other insurance companies are going along with it and raising their premiums and deductibles too. So all my out-of-pocket expenses are 75% higher than they were 30 years ago.
Wow.
I got to tell you, I'm going to retire pretty soon. I'm 64 years old, and I really hate it that I have to pay for every little whiny kid that seems to think they're entitled to making that kind of money. You have people who are working at Walmart who have been there for years and years, and they're making $10 an hour, and they're thinking, wow, well, now you're going to have kids coming in at entry level. What's going to happen there?
Kathy,
somebody's going to get fired.
It's a great point, and I appreciate you making it. Thank you so much for the phone call, and best of luck with your pending retirement. That's good. Yeah, I don't know about the earnings tax issue. Certainly, that's going to be another thing tying up any kind of merger with the county. All right, 314